Hey everyone, welcome back to Mindful Notions, where we help young professionals do more with less. I'm, as always, your host, Sam, and today it is episode 3 of Accessible Intelligence, which is a new series with my co hosts, Austin, Hillary, and Megan, where we specifically talk about what it even means to be a working young professional or working professional in general in the age of AI. We're going to be talking about the latest Notion conference, which happened last week, Make with Notion. And if you don't know, Notion is a productivity tool that is one of the most popular productivity tools that tech community likes to use, but also hundreds of millions of others as well from around the world. And I wanted to do this recap and what that meant for the future of work in AI, because I think this is a good ratio of like one pretty avid user of Notion, that is me, and then 3 people that know of Notion, use Notion to their own extent, but not at an avid user level. I feel like that's a good representation of the ratio for the Notion user base as well. So I think maybe we'll start with just defining the Notion tool in your guys' words and preferences, because that's something I find reveals like different answers based on who you ask. So based on your understanding, how would you guys define Notion? Megan, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah. You know, it's funny because I was not an avid user of Notion, and then I found about your Sam's content, and I started like watching your videos and learning more about how it's like a very modular tool and how, in many ways, it's a lot more customizable than any Google Docs or Google Drive. And just as a collaborative workspace is truly amazing for helping big teams kind of work together. Um, so yeah, I feel like you kind of introduced me through your content to what Notion is
Right.
um and how cool of a tool it can be, especially when collaborating with remote teams. Um, yeah, just a really great like workspace to help teams like work together and build workflows that work for them.
Okay, awesome. I did not pay Megan to say any of that. So let me just be clear. That was all of your own free will. Okay, great. Hillary and Austin, what about you guys?
I can go next. Also, I don't use Notion very often. I think the extent to which, honestly, is using it for accessible intelligence for this podcast for us to really collaborate. Um, I do see the advantages of Notion very much so, and the way I see it is kind of um, a version of Google Drive in some ways, in the sense that it, to me, is first and foremost like an organizational tool. But what I see as an advantage over Google Drive is that one, like the unit isn't necessarily the form of like a document. And there's more opportunity to incorporate other types of media. And at the same time, the overall interface is just more customizable, where it's not just like a folder. And it's like the same folder over and over, or there are like some stock images, or you can upload your own photo or something like that. It's the way it looks and the way it's organized can very much be um, based on what the user wants. So I see the advantages, but that being said, I am not an avid user, so we can go in a little bit to that section later as needed.
Yeah, we will. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm also not an avid user. I think my initial thoughts were very similar to what Hillary just said, in that what I was going to say was, I mean, she kind of stole it from me, but I was going to compare it to Google Drive in terms of I see it having that same function of that shared workspace where you can keep documents, where you can work out of all of the same functions. It just does it better. Like Hillary said, it maybe has more um, more adaptability, more, I think Megan said this, but modularity. I don't know if that's a real word, but ability to really adapt it to how you want. I think for me, something I've personally been using it for is more of just a data storage space, where if I want to work out of it and then work on my computer or work on something else, I don't feel like I need to log into anything, or I can pull up an app and then it's all there, the same thing. something I really want to start using it for that I haven't yet. And I only actually, right before this, Hillary and I were looking around and I saw this was something you could do. But I want to try using it as a data storage, but integrated with the AI tool. In terms
Yeah.
of putting a bunch of documents there, then kind of going to the AI page and saying, hey, looking through all these documents, what is this you can tell me, or what documents would you pair together, stuff like that, where tying the data storage part of Google Drive, but the AI forward that Notion seems to have very uniquely.
Yeah, see, three very wildly different, I think, takes, or at least just different ways to talk about Notion. I feel like that is always the hardest part of coming to like a general understanding of what this tool really is. Is it Google Drive, but is it something more? How AI is it versus how manual it is? I mean, I think there's a lot of similarities with how I think people talk about Notion and how they talk about AI, at least like from the young professional context, where I just hear it used a lot in the same way of like, in a casual way where you're expected to know what the other person is saying when they just say like, oh, I use AI or I use Notion, but actually just means very different things. I think at its core, Notion is just like a productivity tool, both on the personal level, but now increasingly on the teams and enterprise level. And that's why the conference, both this year and our first one that we had last year, is so much centered around just workflows, both like autonomous workflows, but then actual like human-led workflows. And then this year, it's been very focused on AI and AI agents. That was the dominant thing for the Notion keynote that our CEO, Ivan, or the Notion CEO, Ivan, led. We talked about shipping with the confidence in the age of AI, building AI first business, AI Progress Unpacked, which happened with some of our friends from Anthropic. I'm curious, based on if you guys looked at the conference programming or just your general impressions from the conference, what stood out to you? Because again, I think the three of you are closer to the average Notion user than I am. I think one of the truest statements I heard this past week was like, the Notion ambassador does not represent the average user. And that is always an important thing to keep in mind, because if you solve for our pain points, you would get a much more advanced version of Notion, which is not necessarily the goal, or just like it would be too much at once. So I'm curious, based on what you guys just have seen from the conference programming or heard from me or other people, what was standing out to you?
I can start just in that what you said about the Notion ambassador not being the maybe typical Notion user stands out, just because to me it just feels like there's too much potential almost. That you can just do so much, but at that point, I already know what to do with it. And as you told me yourself, the more you use it, the more you figure out what you can do, what you might want to do. But if you're not using it that much, then you're not exploring that. One thing I'd want to ask you in terms of that is you mentioned that the Notion conference talked a lot about and really focused on this new agent tool.
Mm-hmm.
And Hillary and I, right before this, we had some time into like, okay, well, we'll experiment with the AI, the Notion AI agents. And we sat there and we're like, what do you use an agent for? How is an agent different from normal AI? So maybe if you can you give us in your own words where you see this agentic tool coming in?
Yeah, for sure. I think that is the question on a lot of people's minds, and it was still on a lot of people's minds after the keynote as I was talking to people. So Notion's been around for coming up on a decade in some shape or form, and we kind of view Agent as the third iteration of Notion. So the first iteration of Notion was just what you see when you open the app right now on your phone or computer. It's just the page, right? Like Notion is built on pages. So when you're making your to-do list, to making your complicated like product requirement docs, to any use case, like that is Notion 1.0. When Notion became popularized and wasn't just among like, let's say, early adopters or productivity nerds and geeks, that was roughly Notion 2.0. And that is Notion databases. So pages come together. They can either just stay next to each other as pages, or we can form more complex systems where instead of pages just being next to each other, they can actually interact with each other. They're like subpages of a database, or they get transformed into graphs or table views or calendar views, which connects now to Notion Calendar. And that's where you get Notion 2.0, where you move away from the more simplistic just page setup and you get into some pretty complex systems where, again, yes, individuals have a lot of use for databases, but teams especially get a lot of use out of it. This is all roughly a sketch, of course. This era, it's almost like you're working in tandem with Notion AI. And Notion AI both has its own software, but can also integrate with your Claude, your Chat, your Gemini, the main AI LLMs. And it's trying to meet the moment of, especially for young professionals, where we've talked about it on this series, you are expected to like know how to work with AI. And that is a very nebulous term, like Notion, that is defined differently by each company. But essentially, if pages kind of formed the foundation of this work and then databases started giving a structure to it, the agent era is supposed to work with you in order to make your work even faster. That's like the most ideal state. So instead of having to exit wherever you're working from, like name your workplace, you can do all of that within Notion and then also have agent just get rid of as much of the manual or admin stuff as possible. Agent cannot just edit specific pages. It can edit entire databases. There's calendar agent coming, mail agent coming. So it's meant to reduce the administrative load as much as possible. So that's how I would describe the current moment. Thoughts, questions about it?
I can go. I think one thought I have is I would say almost like a baseline assumption is that you have a workflow already in place, right? Because when you think about all of these optimizations, it's optimizing an existing process. But I think something that I don't know rings true for me, especially I would say at an individual level. I can't speak so much to like a team level where structure is maybe more formalized, but like especially when I'm looking at my own work streams, like for instance, like how I literally organize like my posts and stuff like that for Staffel. It's not necessarily the most organized thing.
Yeah.
And I think I'm like generally an organized person, but sometimes, especially when you're building new systems, you're starting new things, it's hard to know exactly what you want in the moment. And part of it is like accepting the disorganization of that and just going with the flow sometimes. So I think to me, that comes across as like a barrier when I think about using something like Notion in the sense of I understand its potential. Like I understand like what it could do for me. But I think because I'm partly going in without a clear sense of like what my input would be, like what I would want to optimize, like the process I would want to improve in the first place. It makes me unsure about what I could get from it sometimes. But that's just my perspective and my reaction.
Yeah, that makes sense. Megan, did you want to get in as well?
No, I think that's a really interesting point. That kind of like brings up maybe I'm kind of curious about like who Notion develops for. Like who is like the target audience for Notion? And I guess yeah, I'm curious if you know about how kind of like this cult sort of love for Notion kind of where it came from, like what communities it kind of started in.
Yeah.
Oh, this has really just become like a grill fest for Notion. And you're the defense.
Honestly,
Yes.
we kind of need that though, because I mean, I'm very lucky. We're in a lot of spaces where Notion's like super beloved and it's just that's the baseline assumption. But again, that's not the average user and not necessarily who Notion wants to cater to all the time, which is just people who already love the product. I think this is a good point to say like all of these thoughts and views are my own. Like this is what I have experienced. This is in no way representative of the company, which is a separate entity. So I would say Notion, I think right now Notion caters most to like the prosumer, like the professional consumer, where like you're not just gonna, I think when you look at Notion from a personal standpoint of like all the tools you could use to do your Substack posts or do like your grocery list or do something that is more just on an individual level, like I personally think Notion is good, but I do think there's probably like more simple tools out there and more complex tools. Like I think there's a way to like manage the complexity up and down to like really get at your subjectivity because like the way you do your post, Hillary, is like different from how I do mine, which is like I probably have like less structure, honestly, because I'm not writing as much. So it's just more like a placeholder. And if I need it, then I will use it. Like that's how I treat our episodes as well. Like as long as there is a place to like put thoughts in. So I think it is already more work focused and it's increasingly becoming hopefully friendly to businesses to use it as well. Of course, we already have like pretty large enterprise clients, or Notion already has pretty large like enterprise clients and business clients. But I think that's the general direction if Notion as a knowledge management tool wants to really represent what the future of work looks like. It's really hard to get around being used by like really prominent companies like OpenAI uses Notion, Cursor uses Notion, Ramp uses Notion. And it's like that, I think that is where the company is going towards versus before it felt a little bit more of a mix between individuals and businesses. That's at least my understanding of it. In terms of why there's such a rabid community for it, I think that is like a miracle, honestly. Like it's quite rare for a tech SaaS product, software as a service, SaaS product to like get this type of reception. I mean, you can see it on LinkedIn, X, Reddit. Like people really care. It's not just like, yes, there's the adulation of like, wow, like offline mode's great or agent's great or Notion AI is great. People have genuine critiques of how to get the product to be better. And I think that type of energy started from Notion's early days in like the late teens of the 2000s, where I feel like the core team at the beginning, including the CEO, Ivan, and Akshay as well, like they were the super customer focused and like this in the tickets responding. I think there used to be a requirement where when you became a Notino, which is what the Notion employees call themselves, like you had to spend at least an hour just answering like customer support tickets, like understand really the customer perspective. So I think the company had just built a culture very early on of like, yes, of course, in general, like probably feedback is important for a company, but I think that they probably just took it to another level. And then what started as like maybe informal groups on the internet just talking about their love for Notion turned into people making their businesses off of Notion, which turned into more criticisms, like in a good way, constructive criticisms of the product that have continuously been incorporated. And to this day, I think that the biggest point of someone like me and Notion ambassador is that we get to test features early. What we do with that in terms of like running our business, or in my case, like with my content and hosting Notion events, that can be separate. But I do think there is such a strong flywheel of like ambassadors giving really in-depth critiques and detailed feedback months before like Agent came out, for example. Like I remember the first time I played with Agent, I just felt so much excitement because it was a few months ago at this point where I was like, this could be like, and this is how I feel about Notion too. Like this could be really good. And I think that is a sentiment that you all can agree with. But it's that sense of like, not only can this be really good, but I feel like I am part of this process. Like I feel like I am being asked for my input and it's being taken seriously. So I think that's why the community is so strong today, because like literally 2 full sessions of this one day conference was run by Notion ambassadors. And it wasn't just like the community. It was, this is how I'm like making my livelihood from like this super music perspective to small business perspective to designer perspective. Like it just kind of ran the gauntlet. So I think that's why it's so strong, because not only is the like the love for the product there, but it's because you could like make some sort of a living off of it. thoughts on that?
I have that's really interesting to me. Um, I would actually be curious for this breakdown of what you said there's significant enterprise use for this. And I would actually
Yeah.
be curious to break that down a little bit more into, yeah, it's helpful for companies, but what who exactly within the enterprise is benefiting? And specifically, I guess the distinction I'm thinking of is like between managers and the people being managed. And I actually recently interviewed someone for Musings, but something that came up during that is is a broader critique about AI policy, but it's the sense that it comes top down, and for that
Mm.
reason, it's a lot harder for people to understand and personalize in a way that actually makes it actually helps them optimize their work, right? And it's a somewhat imperfect analogy, but I guess what I'm trying to get at here is like when we think of like businesses using Notion, like is it kind of like going back to this question about customers, right? Is it kind of like the CEOs who are pressing for it top down? Is it like managers? Is it like every day just like workers within the company sort of managing their workflows? To what extent is it this like policy driven thing, if you will, or is it like a just a platform that really encourages like personalization, like truly like for that like individual unit of a user? I don't know if that makes sense, but just some like distinctions in terms of when we think about like business uses and like who users are.
I think that is a question the company is really thinking about, or if not, they have to think about, because there's an inherent tension between solving for like the lowest common denominator. I don't mean that like in a bad way. I just mean like when you're in an effective workplace, like everybody needs to be able to use it, right? Like the people from the most prolific users, like anybody's like crazy about Google Drive to like the one who just checks it when they have to. Like that needs to be the system because that is like the best enterprise software. There's a tension between that versus how well Notion does personalize. Like my Notion is very different from like, yes, the people here, but even other ambassadors, like they do crazy things with their Notions that like, yeah, I could probably figure out and everybody on this call could as well, but it just would take so much time and like it's so subjective and personalized where there's that tension of like, okay, yes, technically, how do you make sure Notion can still be used by everybody on the team from the CEO to the new hire? Because that should be the goal, but still allow for the flexibility for like the power users, like people like me to really kind of take it to the next level. And I think that's why it was funny that with all of the agent releases at the conference, and again, just my perspective, I feel like the response was quite like figured it out. Like, okay, like I guess we're gonna figure this out. But when it was announced that like the database row permissions, where you could like individually share permissions for each database row, like the crowd went wild. And I think that's the tension that the company finds itself, where it's like, yes, like the company wants to meet the moment with AI, but at the same time, like what makes Notion so beloved is like when it listens to its users and when it's giving like really practical ways to allow for that personalization. Like with database row permissions, for example, that means like anybody who just uses Notion like once every few months, like they'll only be able to see like what they need to see, right? Versus like originally it was either you shared this database of maybe like thousands of like tens of thousands of entries or you didn't. Like that there was no in between. So I think that is a good example of a way that Notion is trying to like split the difference of like, yes, everybody from CEO to new hire should be able to use this like for their work, but recognizing that not everybody's going to use it at the same level, and the people who want to use more should be able to have those capabilities.
I think that's a very interesting distinction, not just for managerial level versus active worker level. Not saying managers don't work, but um, but I see also maybe there's a difference or a tension there in terms of whether it's Notion is marketed towards companies, enterprise, versus marketed towards a person to creatively use. And there's probably that similar level of where do you go in one direction versus another? And I know because I use one app for work, and I can't even imagine using it outside of work. But and I think that's just because it's so perfect for what it does in work in terms of organizing stuff. But I can't even begin to think of how I would want to use it in daily life. One, since you say that Notion is so good at taking personal opinions, criticisms, not that one,
Yes,
just to give
please.
a piece of personal unsolicited opinion.
Yeah.
I've interestingly see it very similar to Excel. And I say that because recently I've been going on a journey. I posted on my Substack, and I think you saw it, but trying to learn how to do quantitative analysis using Excel. So made ChatGPT give me a whole international affairs related homework assignments to do it. And if you would have asked me 2 weeks ago what I could do with Excel, it'd basically be what I would say right now with Notion, which is you can put information in it. Now there's through what else you do. But now, Hillary's shown me a little bit of our formulas, and, ChatGPT helped. So now I know a little bit more. I'm a little more confident in terms of using it to actually do something that you can't do with other tools, or maybe that it specifically does better. And so I think for Notion, that is what I see as its biggest challenge, or maybe opportunity as well, is in terms of how it can differentiate. I know it sees itself, maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but sees itself as a catch-all, a do everything machine. But also, how can it necessarily differentiate itself from Google Drive? And it seems like what you're saying is the ability here is the database ability, is the AI integration. But really, what will be the difference maker is if a person learns how to use it. Similar to how I learned how to use Excel, because before it was just a data organization. I can create the charts, I put in the tools, that was it. But once you get into it, learn how to use it, and once you know what it specifically is good for, I think that's how when tools become that bigger product, that more part of a person's life.
Right. Megan, what are your thoughts on how Notion compares to maybe other tools you interact with?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, having, taken a lot of computer science courses, I know, I don't currently use Notion super extensively except for working with, I do UGC sometimes with, various tech startups, and they always use Notion because it's a great collaborative tool. But I think in my own life, the time when I found it the most helpful was for when I was taking, notes in my computer science classes, because you can take notes in, perfectly formatted code in Notion in a way that Google Docs does not let you. And I thought that was really great, really fun. I was like, "Wow, that's awesome." Um, but yeah, I think maybe the barrier for me in adopting Notion more is probably the fact that there is so much possibility. I feel like we were talking about this, when Hillary, was was speaking earlier, but, there's so many, if you know the right plugins, if you know the right, formulas, there's so much you can do with Notion, and that's a bit intimidating, which is funny
Yeah.
because you're like, "Wow, I'm gonna give you this tool that'll answer all your problems if you know how to use it right." And I think maybe this is also the problem we're seeing with, AI in the corporate world as well, with that article with Austin's, um, podcast for, Accessible Intelligence last week. Sometimes when you're given, the perfect answer to something, if you just don't know how to, implement it seamlessly into your own life, it's a little intimidating and hard to use. And maybe I'm feeling that kind of bottleneck in my own life when presented some of these tools, even like Notion. Something I've just been reflecting on lately, because I know I'm quite aware that Notion has so many great features. I just haven't figured out how to integrate them seamlessly into my life.
If I could actually ask Megan like a quick follow-up to that, I kind of want to ask you a little bit about this conversation in the context of what you're doing as a founder? Because I'm sure like as you're building your own startup, like building your own product, you're also grappling with these questions about like, who is your audience? How do you make things accessible, right? And there's this tension between like, oh, I want to be able to give like as much as possible, but at the same time, like there is a bit of learning that people need to invest, right? So I guess like without like overwhelming the comparison, I'd be curious for you to talk a little bit about kind of what are the key accessibility considerations you're thinking through now with your startup, and like if you were to extend that a little bit further, like how does that perspective of you as a founder sort of connect to your experience as a user, in this case of Notion?
That's a really good question. I actually feel like I hit kind of like a wall with this question earlier this week, which is so fun. Thanks for asking it. I think I came to the realization that so I'm like building a tool essentially to help strategy consultants do their work more easily, just like a end-to-end strategy consulting AI tool, or like a junior consultant sort of that works along with the consultant. And, I came to the realization that a lot of people are just very capable and satisfied with using whatever makeshift kind of things that they've managed to use. They use, like, different AI tools for different parts of their workflow. It's not connected, but they actually don't really mind it. And so the thing that I've been trying to grapple with is, if presented with a better tool, would people be willing to use it? And I think there's that question exactly is something that I've been trying to figure out. I think a lot of the times what AI tools do get wrong is that they don't, take into account what infrastructures are currently existing. So that's like most industries use Microsoft products. If you build an AI tool you wanna sell to an industry that uses a Microsoft product, you have to be able to integrate seamlessly into using Microsoft products or using Google Drive or integrate with Slack and make sure that you can have all these plugins with what's already there so that when you provide this additional solution that's meant to be the, Hail Mary, like, let me solve all your problems, it doesn't feel like much of a difference for the
Yeah.
user. And I think that's something that I've been trying to figure out, a little more because I think that realization really clicked this week for me 'cause I spent all this time trying to figure out, well, what the core problems were, but not asking the right questions to figure out how can I solve your problems, but in a way that it where it doesn't feel like I'm changing anything about the way you currently do your work. I'm just helping you do it better. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
I That makes a lot of sense to me. I think something that I've noticed with Notion is like for a startup, it has a relatively long history at this point. Like it's been around for near a decade, and I mean it's only grown in popularity, I would say, within the past 5. But there's something about also just being able to wait out people or companies that come and go, which is like a little ironic because obviously the startup life is very much like come and go. You're trying to get acquired, but I think the longer I have done Notion content, I think we're past 2 years now, the more I get some of those latent consumers, including my own family, where like last month, my sister, who is like one of the smartest people I know, very type A, like doesn't really use Notion. She's like, okay, I think we need to use Notion for like our family travel because it's becoming too much. Like it's also just an accumulation thing where just building off your point, like a way to show that your product or whatever you use is helpful is just the longevity. And again, in startup world, like that's not necessarily the goal to like always be at that company. But I do think at least for like a content creator who's done stuff for Notion a long time, it's pretty hard to argue at this point that I don't genuinely enjoy and like believe in this product because I don't come and go. I just kind of am here and just keep using it. So I think that is also a big selling point where you have Notion ambassadors who have done years of this. So also like when you enter the community for Notion ambassadors, which is not easy at all, actually, we may work on that. But like there are people that have tried ideas for years and like are just very smart and capable of what they do with their systems. So I think there's also a testament to Notion's success. It's like how long it's managed, both its product, but also now its community.
What do you think about that, Megan? As a founder, I think something that resonates with me especially is this aspect of like community promotion, right? The sense of like you can say what you want as like a founder, but for it to sort of resonate with an audience, in some ways you need an intermediary and people who have ins with other communities to sort of proliferate that. So Carrie, like, I don't know, I feel like this is a really interesting conversation to like understand, like, we're talking about Notion as like, I don't know if late stage startup is like quite the right word, but like, a long-term startup versus like, Megan, you're very much doing something a lot newer. So like how you're incorporating those insights and like, as we're sort of critiquing and discussing the product now, like how that reflects on our own experiences.
Yeah, I mean, something I've just been kind of in awe about hearing Sam talk about is just like this community that Notion has been able to foster, and hearing about the fact that it is the Notion ambassadors that really ran this whole conference. I think that's amazing. I mean,
Yeah, that's going to be the title.
they built a product where like the users of the product want to triumph them, and I think that is such a win. I feel like as a founder, you want to build something that people love, but you also want it to grow like legs of its own, and you want people to take your product and just like take it to the moon and beyond. Like I feel like the job of a founder is to build something that people love to use, and for its users to then take that product and innovate on top of it, do things that even I would never have thought about as a founder myself to use it for. And I think that's the dream. And so for me, just like, I feel like I've always used Notion as kind of like a case study of what to do right when it comes to listening to your users, taking feedback very seriously, and kind of like using that as your guiding star for figuring out like what you should be prioritizing and figuring out how to build good products, because I think they've done that incredibly well.
And it's not just like the effectiveness of the product, it's also that Notion is quite committed to making it beautiful. Like I think one of the taglines is because software should be beautiful. And that aesthetic piece often gets, I think, not underrated, but it doesn't seem as important as it's like the functionality, right? Like the performance, the reliability of the product. But I do think Notion would not be where it is now, including the rabid ambassador fan base and power users, if you couldn't just make it as like pretty as you wanted. So I think that's a general undervalued thing, especially in startup world. Austin, did you want to get in?
Oh yeah, I was going to make a very valuable comment on the fact that Megan, you want to make a product that people love, yet you're targeting consultants. That's a little bit of, I don't know if any consultant will love anything they do. They're working.
Maybe.
Great. If you
Maybe
can
they
achieve that, if you can achieve that, I think that's your magnum opus. I think what you were saying, Sam, about making it beautiful, really, I think that is, honestly, the biggest aspect for me. It's maybe so simple. I love the dark mode of Notion.
Yeah.
It's so aesthetic. And it's really one of the only reasons I like writing on it is because it looks good. And I think that really is it. If you can make it have that Notion aesthetic, just like I think it's fair to say there's an Apple aesthetic, there's a Meta aesthetic. If you can have its own identifiable almost color scheme or anything associated with it, I think that's what separates something as a product in a way.
And that's actually like one of the sessions we did with a Uniqlo executive, actually. So I don't know if that means Austin gets like a main stage like speaker pass for next year, but I think that's like what we talked about. Where I'll head up Ivan. I got you. But we talked about like how with Uniqlo, like you get to see the clothing, like it's Uniqlo. Like you don't need to see like a brand name. Like you understand like the type of clothing that Uniqlo is. Like that's what I think Notion tries to be, a software where like you instantly can tell when it's a Notion page versus like maybe for other bigger players, like sometimes it can be a little hard to differentiate. But I do think I'm biased, so I get very excited when I see somebody use a Notion page. But I think there's something to be said when I can recognize it really easily, even just by a glance, like going in the coffee shop or something like that. All right. Okay, go ahead.
One last quick thing. I think this is something I've been thinking about a little bit. I'm not sure if this is something that I've made up or whether it actually exists. But I think there is an aesthetic to the new era, to this era of AI, clean energy. I think there is something there where when you see, and maybe I'm going completely off the rails here, but I think when you
Hillary seems to think so, yeah.
maybe this is just for someone who's working, but I think when you see a Google Doc or you see, Teams, there's a visceral reaction where it feels like manual labor. It feels like something that's slow, that you kind of have to drag, pull. But I think when people think about the future, when people, we're reading this book for a book club right now, Psalm for the Wild Goat, I think.
Yeah.
But it's this in the future where they somehow figured out clean energy. They figured out everything. I think AI has this aesthetic with it in terms of sleekness that I think needs to be harnessed to really do well in this era. Something about simplicity, about sleekness, about this futuristic design just goes with it. That I think maybe in my head is that's what will replace these traditional players, legacy players, is just aesthetics.
Right. That's fair.
If I could just I see what you're saying. I see the point about a clean aesthetic. I'll say this conversation overall has made me excited in the sense that I love, or like I said, I do love organizing things. I love building structure out things. But when I do think about building those structures, I think for me, I do still think about opening up my notes app and just jotting down bullet points and then sub points and stuff like that. And it is clunky. I know it looks horrible. It doesn't look as nearly as good as what it could look like in Notion. I'm aware of that, but for me, that remains kind of the dominant forum, irrespective of the aesthetics. So I just wanted to voice that in the sense that I am, especially through this conversation, having talked about it for however long, 45 minutes, it makes me really excited to think about a possibility of optimizing my work stream and optimizing my productivity. But I think it's that barrier that I guess, Notion is working through that to sort of I think it's especially to build that bridge between your own style, your own productivity, and making that look good. Because I think for a lot of people, it's well, I'm just a person. It doesn't matter how it looks, just my to-do list, right? But how do you even get an average person, as an individual, as a creator, as an employee, whatever it is, to imagine their workflow as something that can be really as something that's pretty, as something that's aesthetic. I think there is something there to that last point you made, Sam, about aesthetics being a sense of a reflection of formality, of legitimacy in some way. But
well, I mean, the notes app does not have dark mode, so I would say it's kind of aesthetic, but I could recall.
I mean, there you go. I think also we've talked about how in the age of AI, having taste and curation becomes exponentially more important because AI can have taste, but I think human taste is still very unique. And I've talked about that on previous episodes and different podcasts as well, but just building off that point as well. Let's close out with rapid fire segment. As you guys know, 1 to 2 sentence answers, but also it's not super strict, so feel free to elaborate as needed. Let's make sure we answer the title of this. So I'm going to first prompt with Make with Notion changes how young professionals work by blank. So Make with Notion changes how young professionals work by blank. We can do Megan, Hillary, Austin.
Making collaboration easier.
Okay, good. I'm glad.
making organization accessible.
Okay.
I like going last this time, as I always say. I'm going to say by making something yet to be seen. At least for myself, so discovery phase.
And I'll say by introducing agents to people who wouldn't use it otherwise. Make with Notion does not change how young professionals work by blank. Same order. It's a thinker.
Yeah.
But could you clarify that question? Sorry. So like you're saying it has this feature, but that feature won't change the way that young
That's
professionals
one way to put it, or just be like, with all these features, yeah, basically. I mean, I would just rephrase it in my head. Just like, yeah, like Make with Notion has released all these great features, but like it in this way, it doesn't really matter. Like young professionals will still have to like work, for example, or like will still have to do this, which I guess would be my answer. But if that helps at all.
We could reverse the order.
Yeah, let's reverse it. Yeah, you go, Austin.
Yeah, I was going to say Make with Notion after that Advanced Blurred. It doesn't change how that people still have to work. And I think going back to what we were saying earlier with if it's enterprise use, there's something nice about making work easier, but at the end of the day, if it's still like you're getting told to do something, maybe that you don't necessarily want to, it might not change that aspect.
For me, it doesn't change the fact that you still have to learn how to use Notion.
Yeah, and I guess for me, it's kind of like the need for or the importance of creativity.
Right. I agree with all three of those. I think it also doesn't change the need for the Notion community. I mean, I'm biased again, as I have been this entire time, but I think especially with Agent and whatever Notion 4.0, 5.0 looks like, they'll need the ambassadors even more because the gap kind of just gets wider between the company and its users. And that's what the ambassadors are there for. All right. I had another one in mind. I would use Notion more if blank. So this is a personal one, but how would you use Notion more if it had this feature or this capability? I guess any order, whatever, whoever's ready, please just speak for the continuity of the podcast.
Okay, I've actually tried to use Notion to make like a Yossified personal budget tracker.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
it wasn't what I had in mind. Like it wasn't amazing, but I know the tech is getting there, just not yet for my Yossified budget tracker.
Okay. We'll
Yeah.
keep tabs on that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I would say I would use Notion more if I, to be honest, saw it as more of a AI wrap. As to me, I haven't yet gotten to the point where I don't see it as anything more than a Google Docs or a synthesizer or a data storage place. I don't see it similar to how I would see Perplexity or some other tool that I see as AI first. I go there to the AI page to use it that way.
Yeah, hopefully we are changing that. But yeah, I agree.
I would use it more if I could import my Google Drive history. I think there's a lot there. My Georgetown Drive is filled with like everything I did from my time there, basically. And that in itself to me is like a source of legitimacy for that platform because I can just go back and reopen it. So
Okay, I might be able to. I mean, I don't have like a silver bullet for that, but yeah, that is one of the top use cases for like if a person's going to transfer over to Notion or not is if they can migrate their Google Drive data specifically. So I think the team's very aware of that. I would use Notion more if I'm actually waiting for Notion conferencing. I don't think it's a priority. I have not seen any product roadmaps, but I would love for Notion to have its own conferencing tools. Like I don't know exactly how to make that like a Notion version, but they've done it with Calendar. They've done it with Mail. It's just like, it makes sense that you don't need to go to like Zoom or Google Meets if Notion just like had a way for you to, I don't even like structure how a call goes. Like, I just think there's a lot of possibilities there as somebody who, again, like lives and breathes video audio. Like, that might just be a personal thing. But I'd love just like to not even exit a Notion page to like start a meeting, that like a conferencing meeting. That'd be great. You can hop in and out, and you can make it like a huddle. Like, I just think there's like so many good collaboration things out of that if Notion really wants to be like an in-house collaboration tool. But I'm sure I'm not the first person that's thought of that. All right, this has been episode 3 of Accessible Intelligence. To be determined the name. I think the young professional prompts maybe threw us off a little bit, so we'll see if that stays the same. The fun doesn't stop. We have 2 more episodes of Accessible Intelligence coming in the following Wednesdays, and we have more fun Notion content. So first, if you are in DC Thursday, October 2nd, which should be tomorrow on the day this comes out, you could have the chance to win some Notion swag. Not this is mine. And we do not have another, but I do have some Make with Notion swag that we'll be handing out at our first ever post Make with Notion DC specific event. I expect turnout to be high, especially because a lot of people that are going are my friends. So it'd be bad if they didn't. Not a threat, just an observation. What?
Do we get them?
Yeah.
Like, we put in the work and stuff, so
I will try to save some stickers in the back for you guys. But there will be more Notion merch opportunities, I'm sure, for you guys. Yeah, we'll figure that one out. And then if you're in London, Saturday, October 18th, please come support me and Megan. I'll include that link at the Cheerful Earful Comedy Podcast Festival, where we will talk about very fun things, such as, can you fall in love with an AI chatbot? Our funny stories of AI, other people's funny stories. We will be combing Reddit and X. Also, if you have any funny stories, please send it our way. But we are taking the Notion train to DC and London. And with the rest of these episodes, I'm sure I will talk about Notion at some point. But this has been the main topic for this episode. I was running point on this, if that was not clear. And I'm excited to see what else we talked about. Anything to add, guys, before we sign out?
Oh,
Cool. I'm done.
Yeah.
All right. Bye, guys.